This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Robert Cialdini. He is best known for his 1984 book on persuasion and marketing, Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. Selling over 3 million copies, translated into 30 languages, Robert is the go-to man for understanding effective persuasion. Robert has outlined 6 key principles of influence: reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity. His 1984 book that I cite goes into each of those in depth. Our conversation today, though, is something different. His newest book, Pre-Suasion, a revolutionary way to influence and persuade. Pre-suasion comes before the persuasion. This is priming the table, getting people ready to accept the messaging. I hope you enjoy my conversation today with Robert Cialdini about Pre-Suasion. The last couple years, my guests, and I'm sure many of these people are peers, friends, associates, my guests have included Daniel Kahneman, Vernon Smith, Gerd Gigerenzer, Steven Pinker, Laurie Santos, Collar Cameron, Anders Ericsson, Dan Ariely, Phil Tetlock, Barry Schwartz. The list goes on. I would have had you on much earlier, but you have been cloistered. You have been immersed in a project now coming up for air. Yes?
You're right. It was the book that has just been released last week.
Yeah. One of the things I would love to jump in at the very beginning here. So we've had this rise of behavioral economics, and then we look at your world from a psychology perspective. Can you talk a little bit about, and I think, Daniel Kahneman helped to break this wall a little bit, and this could be a very long discussion, much more than a half hour, but can you talk a little bit about behavioral economics and the social psychology, your realm, and perhaps the overlap, and is there a confusion? Is there a competitiveness? How do you see that today?
Well, I think that there's a deep connection between social psychological approaches and behavioral economic approaches, both of which suggest that human behavior is best predicted and described in terms of a set of factors that don't require that we think about economic self-interest as the major determinant of choices. There are all kinds of other factors, values, emotions, attitudes, and so on, that carry the day as well. And it's important to say as well, because we're certainly not suggesting that economic and fiscal factors are unimportant. It's just that they're not the sole or even, in many instances, the most determining factor in the situation.
You're very well known for your book, Influence. It's become this more than a cult classic. It used to be a cult classic. Now it's just a standard. And so you mentioned, and I mentioned, your newest work, Pre-Suasion. It helps, I think, for sure, for people to see influence ahead of time. And there's a great video on YouTube that goes through a very brief overview. You have your 6 classic principles of influence: reciprocity, consistency, social proof, authority, liking, scarcity. But in your newest work, you see something coming before that. And I mentioned that word priming. And I think anytime any of us want to have an audience or an individual be receptive to a particular piece of persuasion that we might have, there's an earlier step, isn't there?
You're exactly right. One of the things I learned when I was researching this book is that very often the majority of communicators think that the way to optimize the success of a message that they deliver is to spend time getting the message content right, the structure of it, the clarity of it, the attractive features of it. All of that is true, but that's not how we optimize influence. We optimize that process in the moment before we deliver that message by putting recipients in a state of mind that makes them open and receptive to the message we are about to send.
It seems so simple. It seems like common sense. I can tell the audience out there, while that might seem like common sense, the research, the findings behind this, the depth of persuasion, it takes a little bit of time to get through. I will say this, though, also, I can see that you have a lot of fun with this.
Oh, I did, because it was an adventure. It broke the set I had growing up with a model of persuasion that suggested that if I wanted to move people in my direction, I had to do something with my message to change their attitudes, their beliefs, their experiences with what I had to offer. This new research changed everything by suggesting I didn't need to alter anything inside my recipient except what they were paying attention to in the moment before I delivered my message.
Before we get into some examples, in our limited time today, we're just going to go through some examples, and I implore people, they're going to have to go do some reading to really get the full thrust and depth. But how did you start down this path? Was there an aha moment? I mean, here you're very well known for this classic book, Influence. What was the moment, the trigger, or was it a series of events that got you going down this path?
It was the latter, Michael. It was a series of recognitions as I read the newest research in behavioral science and persuasion science that a lot of the work on priming or anchoring or framing or creating mindsets didn't involve the 6 principles of influence. These things set up the 6 principles of influence. They teed them up in a way that gave them greater leverage. It forced me to go back to the research I had done in writing Influence, which was to infiltrate as many influence professions as I could get access to by taking their training. I posed as a trainee, somebody who was interested in a job. And I learned from the inside what they were doing to move people successfully in the directions they hoped for. And I went back to my notes and I looked at what the top scorers in each of these professions were doing. Right? The aces of the professions, what were they doing? And they were acting like gardeners. That is, they recognized that it didn't matter how good the seed was that you wanted to plant. If you didn't prepare the earth first, if you didn't cultivate the ground, that seed wasn't going to take root and flourish. So they spent more of their time than their average contemporaries did creating a state of mind before they delivered their request that was consistent with the strength of their request.
We're talking about trust in many ways, building trust ahead of time. Why don't we give a little color? And I love, there's many examples in the book, but there's an example of a gentleman selling home alarm systems. A simple story, but the data and the results behind it, quite amazing. I think you recall this one where he leaves the house, then comes back in. Could you tell that story?
Yeah. So when I was infiltrating these training programs, I did get some training from a company that sold very expensive heat-activated fire alarm systems in the home. And they would send their salespeople into the home to convince people, usually a couple, that the expense was worth the safety involved in this heat-activated system. I would follow along with some of them during my training to see what they did. Well, there was one salesperson, his name was Jim, who was always the top salesperson. So I was especially concerned to see what he did. He did something remarkable to create trust in his customers, his prospects, before he ever presented the system. He would first get people engaged in taking a 10-minute questionnaire, a little test on their knowledge of fire safety in the home. Then while they were in the middle of the test, he would slap his forehead. He would say, "Oh, I forgot something out in the car. I need to go get it. It's some important information. Do you mind if I let myself out and back into your home?" And the answer was always sure. Sometimes it involved giving him a key to the front door. I saw him do this 3 straight times. And I asked him about it. And he said, "Look, Bob, who do you allow in and out of your house freely? Who would you give a key to your front door to? Only somebody you trust, right? I wanted to be associated with trust in the minds of that couple before I began showing them the information. Because if they trusted me, now they believed what I had to say." It was brilliant, and it was persuasive. He established a mindset of trust before he asked people to consider the pros and cons of his offer.
Did he talk about how he figured that out? Was it just years of experience? Did he stumble into it? Did you get that data from him?
Yes, he said one time by accident, he actually did forget this material out in the car. And when he came back, a skeptical couple then dropped all the skepticism and became very open and yielding to what he was saying next.
I can imagine, though, throughout your career, you've had those moments where you did not expect something, and then boom, you turn around and it's right there. And you could do all the research in advance, but it's that split second, that happen chance, that serendipity, and boom, a light bulb goes off.
You know, something just happened to me like that, where I was the victim, and I saw the light bulb of persuasion go on in my head. I just had a guy who I do business with commit a major faux pas. He screwed up in a way that cost us, my business, a considerable amount of money. And he called to tell me about it. And before he told me about it, he said, "Now, Bob, I hate what I'm going to tell you. And I especially hate it when it happens to good guys like you, to nice guys like you." And then he told me about how he messed up. And Michael, he gave me the role of a nice guy. And I responded to him like a nice guy. I didn't scold him. I didn't demand that he make it right. I waved my hand and said, "You know, it happens. It happens to all of us."
That makes your point that you were saying in the very beginning, that thinking only in terms of rational self-interest, there's a wider connection amongst people that's happening.
Exactly right. He gave me a reputation to live up to. And I did.
It is one of these things. It's when you get into the subject, and again, that's why I say you must have so much fun with it, because as one reading the work, and I'm going to have to go back and read again, because it is one of these things, and I know you know this by design. Literally, you've tried to let the audience see that every sentence has meaning. That's a challenge, because I've written 4 books, so that's a challenge to do.
Exactly right.
That's not easy. Let me bring people in as you talk about that example with the client. I thought another fascinating example too was, I think it was a part of an example in the book, and it was somebody that was selling something, I believe, and they said something to the effect of, I'm not going to be able to charge you, and I'm making up the number here, I'm not going to be able to charge you $1 million, but, and then you drop it down. But that point of raising it up high, putting that in the mind, and then bringing it down, the research backs the idea that if you put that high number up, then bring it down, it's completely different than not having the high number, isn't it?
That's the phenomenon of anchoring. We can anchor a person's perception of what is a legitimate number by what we say first. Let's say I want to sell you a bottle of mineral water, right? I can get you to pay substantially more for it if I first ask you the distance to the sun. Because compared to the distance to the sun, that bottle of mineral water's price seems trivial. Now, that's what this friend of mine did. He's a consultant in Toronto. He was always getting pushback on the price he would state for a contract, let's say a $75,000 contract. He was always getting people saying, can you give us a break? Can you cut it by 10%, 15%? And he said one day by accident, he said something that eliminated that pushback, and that's been the case ever since. He shows people this contract with the charge of $75,000, but before they see it, he says, as you'll be able to see, I'm not going to be able to charge you $1 million for this. Now, he says that's not enough to win the business every time, too many factors associated with that. But he says it always eliminates pushback on price, because compared to $1 million, $75,000 seems reasonable.
You've got a great line that you quote from Sun Tzu, and people have heard this before, but every battle is won before it's fought. Let me ask, in terms of the type of individual, what does the research show? So I've just kind of drew myself a little sketch of a bell curve here, and I'm imagining to myself, okay, Robert has put all this great research, the technique behind Pre-Suasion. Is Pre-Suasion, obviously I'm thinking in bell curve terms, it's gonna hit the masses for sure, I know that. Are there types of people, are there types of thinkers where Pre-Suasion is not as effective? Or have you found universally that across the populations, Pre-Suasion is just very effective?
It seems to be a universal human operating technique, operating procedure. And let me give you the best evidence I know for this, that it's built into us from birth. Right? There was a study done in Belgium. Researchers brought subjects into an experimental situation, and they showed them photographs with figures standing in the background. 1/3 of the subjects saw figures standing alone by themselves. Others saw pictures of two figures standing apart, separate from one another. A third sample of subjects saw photographs of figures standing together, shoulder to shoulder, unified. Now, the researcher in all of the cases then got up from the table and accidentally, I'm putting that in air quotes, dropped a series of items onto the floor, a bunch of items onto the floor. And the question is, who gets down on their knees spontaneously without being asked and helps the researcher pick up these items? It was by far 3 times as likely to be one of the people who saw photographs of figures standing together. Unity, togetherness is associated with cooperativeness and helpfulness, right? Now, that's the classic persuasive idea. What you do first, right, puts people in a state of mind that inclines them in a particular direction. And if that direction is what your goal is, you will get large-scale increases in the behavior you're looking for. Now, here's the thing that made me rock back in my chair when I read it about that study. The subjects were 18 months old. They were babies, Michael. They could hardly talk. They couldn't plan or reflect or reason. But this procedure is so primitive, so fundamental in us, that it got 18-month-old babies to be 3 times as likely to be helpful because they saw a picture of people standing together in a cooperative, unity-based pose.
What's going to be really amazing, and I mentioned some names at the beginning, is the research that will get down to the cellular level to find out in the years to come, how that unfolds, how the 18-month-old babies can be in that place of mind with no experience, no insights yet, but they're walking into the world with some genetic material that says, I'm predisposed to think like this.
You mentioned Daniel Kahneman a little earlier as one of your previous guests, and somebody I respect very much. And he was recently asked if there's one thing that people could understand that would make them recognize how behavior unfolds in themselves and around them, what would it be? And what he said was, there's nothing that's as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. Everything seems more important than you think it is while you are thinking about it. So the idea is that if we are thinking about a particular concept or an idea or even an image, right, it becomes more important in our eyes in the moment that follows. That's what happened to those children, those 18 months old. Simply seeing the idea of togetherness and unity became more important for them in terms of their actions than before.
Your world is one nonstop moment.
Well, I have to say, these things threw me back in my chair sometimes when I was reading about them. Here's another one that I just love. Suppose you're looking for support on a project, maybe with your boss. You've got a great idea, a plan. What we typically do is to ask for our boss's opinion about it in order to get some buy-in from the boss. That's a mistake. We should change one word persuasively. Instead of asking for your boss's opinion about your plan before you show it, ask for your boss's advice on your plan before you show it. Because when we ask for someone's opinion, what they do is take a half step back from us. It's a separating step. And they go inside themselves for the answer of what their opinion is. If we ask for their advice, they take a half step toward us psychologically. We get a mindset of partnership. And the research shows they're now going to be more supportive of our plan even before they see it because they feel more a part of it.
You mentioned one word, and I've got a note here. It's actually the next thing I was going to ask you about is the right word and the choice of a word. And maybe you're a great example right now with a new title out, Pre-Suasion. I'm imagining that there was a certain amount of behind the scenes, there was a certain amount of sausage making that took place that allowed you to get to the point where you knew that persuasion was going to be the best word for the next many decades of your life, frankly, because you're gonna own this word now, and I'm sure a lot went behind it.
Michael, that's very insightful what you just said, because for the first period of time when I was writing this book, the working title was Moments of Power. And the idea was to find those moments in the course of human exchange with one another, where a request or a recommendation or a proposal will be most powerful. And the more I read, the more I researched, it became clear it was the moment just before the persuasive appeal. So that's where this idea of pre-suasion came from. And you're exactly right that the hope is to coin a term so people will be saying to one another, well, what's our persuasive moment here? What do we put persuasively in the instant before we make our request to give it special traction, to give it special leverage?
In our few minutes we have left, Bob, I have one last question, thought, let you elaborate some. But in your newest work, Pre-Suasion, you talk about a new principle of influence. Unity, you call it. And I think a great example for my audience especially could be Warren Buffett. You have a great story about Warren Buffett and how he talks about his next, what will happen after him, who will take over, and how that will take place. And he really does a nice job of that, doesn't he?
He does a beautiful job in a way that I'd never seen him do before. I'm a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder, and for the last 15 years I've been getting his shareholder reports, the annual letters that he writes to stockholders. Last year, he had a special challenge because it was the 50th year of Berkshire Hathaway since he and Charlie Munger took over and brought it to amazing levels of profit. Right? The challenge was, how does he keep people investing at these enormously expensive levels? A single share of Berkshire Hathaway stock this morning on the New York Stock Exchange was going for $221,000 a share. We've never seen anything like it in our markets. Now, his challenge is, how do you get people to keep investing in this when he and Charlie are getting up in age and might not be there next year? So he laid out a very reasoned statement of why we should continue to invest in Berkshire Hathaway because of the various basket of strengths that they have going for them. But before he did that, he said something persuasively that caused me to wipe away any idea of selling Berkshire Hathaway stock. He said, I'm going to tell you about the strengths of Berkshire for the next 50 years. And I am going to tell you this in a way that I would tell a family member if they asked me, Michael, I've never thought of selling Berkshire Hathaway again. He, not only did he make that point the argument compellingly, I was ready to believe it more deeply than before because he was talking to me like a family member, someone who's inside the boundaries of his sense of we, of unity. Wow, I was just compelled.
It's not just they are like me, but they are of me.
That's the key literary difference, the key linguistic difference. It's not that we like Michael because he is similar to us. It's that we like Michael because he is of us. He's of us. And inside the boundaries of we, everything is easier inside for the influence process. People cooperate more, they believe you more, they trust you more, they change more in your direction.
Robert, I don't think I have to do much selling here. I think your enthusiasm and passion for the subject will win people over. I'm sure my audience will want to check out more. The book is available now, Pre-Suasion, A Revolutionary Way to Influence and Persuade. Thank you for taking some time today. Is there a best website?
Yes, there is. It's called influenceatwork.com. Influence at Work is all one word.
Again, the new book is Pre-Suasion. Robert, I thank you for taking some time today. Great stuff.
Well, thank you for such a perceptive set of questions, Michael.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Unfortunately, today, I only had Robert for a short period of time. But due to the magic of the internet, I will now provide a speech of his that I thought was just really insightful. I hope you enjoy this presentation from Robert Cialdini.
I want to talk about behavior change, and I want to talk about the role of social norms in creating that change. But I'm going to talk about a particular kind of behavior, environmental behavior. How do we persuade people? How do we motivate people to move in our direction? That's been my research area for decades. But that applies to all kinds of behavior. I want to focus today on how we might persuade people to take environmentally friendly, sustainable action by changing the way we send the message to them. Just changing the words that we use to engage them in that behavior change. So I'll begin with a pair of contentions. The first is that program designers or decision makers can rely too much on economic factors, such as financial benefits, or on legal factors, such as regulations or laws, when seeking to motivate their citizens toward environmental goals. Now, those are effective strategies, there's no question about that, but they incur costs. The financial factors, bonuses, rebates, discounts, incentives of one sort or another require economic resources that have to be applied to producing the change. And in our world, economic resources are not unlimited. So very often, they do not get applied to that particular crucial issue. I believe the issue of sustainability is as important as there is right now on this planet. But other goals can drive those resources away. So what happens if we don't have those economic resources to provide? Then we often rely on legal factors, regulations, rules, constraints. That provides another kind of cost to the decision maker or the program designer. It's a social cost. It's not an economic capital that we are expending. We're expending social capital because people don't like being constrained. They don't like being regulated. And they resist and they resent those individuals who try to do it. So is there a third way that we could think of that would also be effective but would not incur these costs? I'm going to suggest that indeed, yes, there is. It is the social norms of the situation. Making people aware of, making them conscious of what is the norm in that situation to do. Right? Now, there's the fundamental kind of norm, which is information about what is normal there. What are the people around us, like us, doing there? What have they been doing there? That has an automatic tendency to drive people in that direction. Now, there are some amplifiers of that effect. We are most likely to move in the direction of multiple others and comparable others. Let me give you another way of saying that, and that is, it's what many others do and what similar others do that spurs us to move in that direction. Let me give you an example of how this works in a situation that doesn't involve environmental behavior, but I want to show the reach of this principle of social norms, and indeed even the cross-cultural reach, because it's a study that comes from restaurants in Beijing. Do you know that if the manager of a restaurant, in this case it was a series of restaurants in Beijing, marks the menu with notifications of which are the most popular items on that menu, a number of fascinating things happen. First of all, it produces an increase of 13 to 20% in the sales of those items immediately, without a single cost. The manager doesn't have to put more high-quality ingredients into those, doesn't have to hire a new chef, doesn't have to increase the pleasantness of the decor. No, just point to something that's true. These are the most popular items on this menu. And this applies, by the way, even to those items that people might not always order, starters, for example, or desserts. Suddenly, I know that when I go into a restaurant, I'm thinking, should I have dessert? Maybe I shouldn't. I had a big breakfast. I expect to have a large dinner. If I see on the menu, this is our most popular dessert, suddenly I have a reason to eat dessert that I didn't have before. Suddenly. And it's a real reason. It's a reason that benefits all of us. I get a great dessert because it's the most popular one, and the owner, the restaurateur, gets an order for everyone benefits, except perhaps my waistline, which suffers. Secondly, notice that strategy is not only effective, it is completely inexpensive, completely unpressured, completely honest, and here's the interesting thing, almost never employed. I've been counting. Fewer than 90% of 10% of the restaurants where I patronize say that on the menu. Now, I want to make a comment at this point. People might ask you about, didn't you say there were interesting speakers? There was one guy who talked about persuasion and influence. Oh, what did he say? Well, he told us that people want to do what they see others doing. You know what your colleague will say to you? With this, he makes a living. Really? I knew that. Everybody knows that. You wasted your time. Tell them about the Beijing restaurant study and say, if everyone knows that, why is it that in 90% of the restaurants that we frequent, there is no such message on the menu, if everyone knows this? See, we know these principles, and there are other universal principles of human behavior at a superficial level, but we don't know how to activate them optimally. We don't know how to amplify them optimally. Let me give you an example from environmental setting. It's the hotel towel research study that I and my team members did. If you travel at all, you know that in 70% of the restaurants that you frequent, somewhere in the room, there is a sign that the manager has put there asking you to reuse your towels and linen. Here's an example of one. Very often there is some nearly extinct woodland creature on the sign, and they ask us to save the environment by reusing their towels. We decided to see if there was a special kind of message we could put on that sign that would be more successful than the typical message. Here's an example of our sign that we put in hotel rooms, 3 separate hotel rooms in the Phoenix, Arizona area in the United States where I live. Right? It said, help save the environment. That's the standard one. All those hotel managers want us to save the environment. They want us to save resources. They want us to save the earth. But we know they want to save something else too. No. They want to save costs. So what can they do? Well, they can say, save the environment and hope that will spur us. But there are some especially clever ones now who have decided to use a principle of social behavior that says people prefer to do things in partnership with others, in collaboration, in cooperation with others. So some hotel chains are now saying on the sign, right, partner with us toward this common cause by hang up your towels, right? So we put different signs like that randomly in these hotel rooms, and then we checked to see how many people actually hung up their towels. We were in league with the maids, right, who made a check mark. And let me show you what happened. On any one night, if the message said, do this for the environment, an average of about 38% of the people helped on that one night. Usually more than 50% help at some time during their stay, but on one night, about 38%. If it said partner with us, any ideas about what the percentage would be under those circumstances? Any ideas? 50%? Nothing. Why? Because you don't get to just claim a partnership. You have to earn a partnership in order to get people to play with that system. This was what the hotel managers were saying to us. You pay us 295 euros tonight, and tomorrow you don't get to use a fluffy towel. That was their deal? It was no deal. But we had a third message, an honest message. It was one that employed the social norms. It said, the majority of guests at our hotel do reuse their towels at least once at some time during their stay. And under those circumstances, we get the most we have ever gotten. Now, here's an interesting question. Is there an even more impactful message that we can send, knowing what we know about the theory of social norms? There is. Remember what we said, is that we don't follow the lead of many others only. We particularly follow the lead of similar others. So we had a fourth sign. This one didn't say the majority of guests who stayed in our hotel in the past have reused their towels at least once. It said the majority of guests who've stayed in this room have reused it. Room 215, just like you. And under those circumstances, we get the most we have ever got. Let me say there are two notable things about this set of results. The first is those most successful strategies were both honest and inexpensive to employ. Secondly, we've never seen either of them in any city, in any hotel, in any guest room in the world. These aren't things that emerge as best practices within the organization. You have to know the behavioral science to hone your message properly. Why don't they know the behavioral science? Because on their board of directors, on their board of advisors, there will be someone from finance, there will be someone from logistics, there will be someone from transportation, there will be a legal person, and there will never be a behavioral scientist. There will never be a PhD level decision scientist on their board. And it's a mistake. It's a costly mistake. Okay, let's ask another question. All right. Well, is there any evidence that this normative information about similar others can influence what people do in their homes with energy conservation? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Let me tell you about a study that I did with my colleagues, especially Dr. Wesley Schultz. We went to San Diego, California, and in random homes in particular neighborhoods, once a week for a month, we put a door hanger on the doors of homes in this neighborhood that had different messages. And we wanted to see what messages would be most effective in getting them to reduce their energy consumption that month. We also had a control group. One control group was some houses didn't get any message. We wanted to see so we wanted to compare the messages to that. We had a second control group where we had a sign that simply urged people to conserve energy. Here's the first finding. At the end of the month, when we looked at their energy usage, those two groups were identical. So simply urging people, simply exhorting people to save energy was the same as nothing. It was the same as nothing. They needed a reason. Well, let's talk about some reasons that we put on that sign. One reason is one you've heard: do this to save the environment. Another was, do this to be a socially responsible citizen, to benefit the society. A third was, do this for your own economic self-interest, so that you will save money at the end of the month on your utility bill. And the fourth was, the majority of your neighbors are undertaking energy-conserving actions on a daily basis, something we had found in a survey. Let me show you the daily kilowatt-hour usage of those signs plus the control group. Right? So here is the sign. Right? This is the combined control group. Environmental protection, benefit to society, saving money, produce small deflections. The only one that made a significant difference is what your neighbors are doing. And it was true. We just had to point to it. Okay, let's finish up here by asking this question. How can we use this set of insights to advance national energy goals? Right? One possibility is to involve the private sector in the process. There is a company in the United States, I happen to be the scientific advisor for this company, called O-Power. They've taken our results, and now they send consumers of utilities, energy companies, a message every month, not telling them how much energy they used last month, which you probably get in your message. They tell them how much energy you use compared to your neighbor. That's all, just compared to your neighbor. It looks like this. And let me show you the results in terms of energy savings. Right? The longer these numbers are, the different utilities, the longer this is in place, the more energy is saved. It's now 3 years into the full commercial rollout of this company, and it has saved 1.7 billion kilowatt hours for telling people something honest. All right? Let's finish. The way I started with my contentions. Decision makers can focus too much on economic and legal reasons to motivate people. There are other reasons that don't just apply to energy, apply to general behavior. Besides this one, there are others, but social norms is one we should not forget.
If you want a good book to read for the holidays, if you want to keep everybody on your wish list up to date, I highly recommend Pre-Suasion. Check it out. Again, Pre-Suasion, a revolutionary way to influence and persuade. It's everywhere. Grab a copy. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.